Welcome to another episode of the AI Time Journal podcast. For those of you whom I've not met, my name's Melissa Drew, and I'll be your podcast host for this episode. Today, our guest is Smriti Mishra. She is currently a researcher for applied AI and data science at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. She is also a NOVA member, which she'll explain that a little bit later, and a director for AI for Diversity. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here, Melissa. And it's honestly a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with you today.
Oh, this will be great. I'm really interested in how you decided that this, because you've been in AI and data science, and you've got a lot of certifications and a lot of programming languages, and you've really done a lot in a short time. But I'm interested to understand what was the appeal to this industry.
So I hope that was not audible.
Okay.
So I was doing my undergrad in electronics and communications back in India, in Bangalore. And I actually hated electronics. It was like a lot of theory for me. And I was more of a, like permutation, combination, probability type of person. And it was a lot of vector calculus. So, like I realized very quickly that I'm not really interested in electronics. So I started trying out different things in order to actually find out what I am the most interested in or what suits me the best, like, based on my preferences. So first summer during my undergrad, I did some work on sensors. The second summer during my undergrad, I worked on this one of the first nanosatellites in India, all student nanosatellites in India, which was done by my university and the Indian Space Research Organization. So there I worked on the detumbling part of it, like in order to stabilize the satellite right after it's launched. So there I worked on C, C++. So I really liked the coding part, but I did not really like to physics or mechanical applications because that's something that I had never worked with at all. And even initially, I always thought that, rotational dynamics or like hardcore physics are one of my weaker concepts in general. So then I decided to, like go closer to coding. So eventually the paper, and the third summer in undergrad, I interned with air pollution and stuff, like more towards climate awareness, etc. So this work that I did on detumbling of satellites, I wrote a paper on it and published it in the International Aeronautical Federation in Germany, Bremen. And at the same time, I decided to do a solo trip across Europe. And that's when I went to ETH Zurich. I had a very close friend who was studying at master's at ETH Zurich. So there I took a cup, and he was doing computational biology and biotechnology. So he had a lot of AI deep learning courses. So I went and attended a couple of lectures with him at ETH Zurich. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And maybe like 3 months before this, I had so I had a very close relative, and she was misdiagnosed in the case of cancer. So there was a cancerous tumor and it wasn't diagnosed correctly. And instead of, like the proper treatments, unfortunately, the tumor was split open, which basically made it a lot worse. So, like constantly between like everyone in my house, like my like my parents, my cousins, my brother, me, like this was a constant thought in our head that, like what if we knew before, or what if we could, like understand it a little better, because it was honestly not a bad case of, like when we went to the doctor, it could have been very easily worked out. So kind of piecing both of these things together, I think that's what motivated me to get into this field. And that's why I think I started, the first project I ever did on machine learning was a lung cancer detection using some CT scan images, mostly like image processing application, not too much of deep learning. But that's how I got in. And then at KTH also, I worked on, like analyzing how people lose memory in diseases like amnesia, dementia. So some of like healthcare application, because that was a key motivation for me to actually start working in this field.
Wow. I wasn't aware of all that. That's pretty amazing. And from that, you then really shifted more into the carbon footprint, the climate change adaptation. I understand that at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden, you are kind of combining some of the things that you just mentioned, the satellite imagery, plus some of the work that you did at your prior company, which I understand is driving AI systems for carbon sequestration. Did I'm sorry, I said that properly? Measurements, creating AI-driven carbon reduction systems, but looking at it from satellite images. And really, I think it's more around the change of deforestation, which I think we'd be really interested in hearing that, because it combines everything that you just talked about into this central perfect storm of utilizing all your knowledge and technologies together.
Absolutely. So actually, my first winter in Stockholm was the winter of 2019, and there was a lot of snow. And then it was my second winter in Stockholm, which was 2020. And I had a party on the 30th of November, and it just snowed the day before that, basically. So that was like the 1 year, that entire winter, where we had like, like snow that you can play with. So it really bothered me because, like I was a foreigner and I kind of like was very fascinated by the snow still. I was sad that there was no snow. So I did a lot of research after that. And I had a couple of friends who were studying sustainability and sustainable production development, etc. And like had more, like knowledge of climate change and sustainable causes in general, and the SDGs. So I wanted to really understand that better and actually try to find out where you're headed, because the priorities in India and Sweden are different because of the development in both the countries in general. So back in India, it doesn't really hit you as a, like a major priority, or at least not back in 2018. So when I came here, I realized how big of a problem this is. And Sweden's like really focused on sustainability, sustainable causes, really tries to do a lot of things, like from like basic things like how you sort the garbage, for example. So so I really learned a lot about it, like speaking with some of my friends and other people who knew about it. And then I decided to, try and see how technology or artificial intelligence could basically help with that. Because right now, when we look at everything around us, like it's digitalizing so much that there is technology, AI, and almost everything, even if it's like a very weak AI or something. So I basically reached out to the co-founder of Earth Bank, Rishabh, through LinkedIn. And I remember it was a Saturday and it was around midnight. And my boyfriend was like, no, what is wrong with you? There are people you're just enjoying. I'm like, no, but until I can't find something, like I can't really chill. I need something and all that. So so I texted him and on LinkedIn, and it was a cold message, and I somehow got a reply maybe like half an hour later or something. And then the next day they sent me some information about the work they're doing, and eventually I met with them and it was really nice and I started working. So there the work was, like to focus more on understanding how we can measure the amount of carbon which is sequestered, mostly in small land areas, which is usually too expensive to get it verified manually. Because, like in manual, there are a lot of expenses. People fly, they measure with like measuring tapes and stuff. It makes it too expensive to do it for a small land. So, but technology does not have all these constraints in general. So yeah, that was the main motive of what was being done there. And right now, when I'm working with like academia, within academia, again, more of like R&D here as well. So right now I'm working on analyzing more of there's this commune in Sweden, district, Östergötland, and there is this small village. So I'm trying to analyze, and the village is supposedly carbon neutral. So I'm trying to analyze how they're carbon neutral and what's like the forest change been happening for the past 20 years, how much forest they lost, which areas did they lose it, like if there has been more of, like afforestation practices, how are they getting like their wood, for example, for heating, or like how do they generate heat, like all those things. But it's still new, so I'm kind of in the beginning stages, but it is like like utilizing satellite images to find out all that. And I'll even try to work on soil organic carbon and things like that, so like we get a better approximation of the carbon sequestration or the carbon that's being stored there.
Are you looking at, you said the past 20 years, so are you looking at images, static images from the past 20 years, but also looking at live images from satellites?
Yeah, so basically what is happening is that I use satellite images from like maybe like 2000 to 2020, for example, so like 20 years. So I'm not exactly working with live images at this point, but like pretty recent images. And so that's like 2D data. So in a satellite image, there's like 13 bands, and I have been working with 5 bands: the red, blue, green, near infrared, and infrared. And they give you good information about the pixel intensity, the health of vegetation, all those things. So but they are good to get like the count of trees, maybe not the height, girth, etc. So for that, I also use some 3D data, which is like the digital elevation models, for example, or the digital surface model. They're not too accurate, as accurate as you can get the satellite images, because satellite images you can get a resolution of maybe like even 40 centimeters. But when you look at the elevation models, usually it's like 30 meters and 20 meters. So it's not as accurate, but it still gives you some information. So it's a combination of those, and sometimes a combination of images from cameras or drones as well, based on the requirement.
When we talk about the value of the work you're doing, we recognize that zero carbon footprint is an awesome goal, and it's oftentimes sometimes not achievable unless I understand, and you can correct me, that you have that perfect balance between how much carbon dioxide you're putting in to the atmosphere versus how much the forest can absorb and then push out the carbon. So I recognize that what you're doing is extremely valuable, but I want to understand a little bit more in why it's so important.
Absolutely. So when we look at, like what's happening with climate change right now, I think it makes it a little more, obvious. And when I think of climate change, according to me, it's been very simple from the beginning that the reason that there is climate change right now, for example, is because we as humans find it so difficult to change our habits. And it's as simple as that. So, like we keep adding to greenhouse gases every day to the atmosphere. And basically every single day it keeps happening and adding on to it. And the other thing is that one of the best ways to deal with climate change are nature-based solutions. Um, they usually are scattered, decentralized, and globally diverse. So it's very difficult to find them and fund them in general and scale them up together in a way that's needed right now in order to tackle climate change. And these usually are the key carbon sinks. For example, if you look at the Amazon rainforest, or if you look at the Sundarbans forests in India, the Great Barrier Reef, so things like that. And it can also be something which is generating a lot of, um, like employment opportunities for indigenous habitats, for example. So now, when we look at this entire picture, it's extremely important that like we work towards deforestation as well, or make sure that we're not losing our trees, or we're not losing our biodiversity in general. This leads to climate change, it leads to desertification, soil erosion. So it's difficult to, like plant trees again also in those areas. And most of all, it keeps adding to the greenhouse gases that I was talking about, which is the main reason for deforestation. And the other thing is that I have worked a lot when I was working at Earth Bank with some indigenous tribes and indigenous communities in Ghana and Nicaragua region in Africa. And most of their life is dependent on the biodiversity there. For example, the shea butter plantations. We use shea butter for like cooking a lot and cosmetics. It's a pretty expensive commodity right now, I think, like in general in the world. But they get paid like $40 a month for the work that they do. And that's also dependent on the, like the trees or the crop. And if they don't have it, they probably won't have any other way of, like making money. So it's extremely important that way as well. So it kind of is more than, if we look at the sustainable development goals, it's more than just the climate action or life on land. It's also about, like removing poverty, um, clean water, food access, and a lot of different things, removing inequalities. So like a simple thing can, like branch out to a huge, like a big level, basically. Yeah.
In your opinion, is it possible for us to reach that zero carbon footprint and not focus on the deforestation?
I don't think so. Like the first thing is, I highly doubt, like on a global level, everyone in the world, uh, that it's even possible to reach a carbon neutral or a carbon positive place right now, if we look at the entire community or the world in general. And like it's extremely important to focus on um, having a biodiversity there, because like if we look at trees that's been planted, and it's pretty like, it's a very important thing that we have the trees and other sort of like biodiversity, because they would eventually sequester the carbon. So now if we plant something new, like plant a new tree, for example, it sequesters a lot less carbon. It has to reach a certain age in order to, reach its
Oh,
maximum,
okay.
to like sequester the most amount of carbon it can. So that's why it's very important for us to, like not just plant trees but also protect them. So that's actually the first thing that I learned when I started working at Earth Bank, is we don't really only need to focus on planting but also protecting trees. That's why right now there are a lot of like amazing initiatives where you can pledge and you can protect certain trees, and or maybe a like forest or like patch of forest or something like that. So it's extremely important because the older trees, they can sequester a lot more carbon, and it usually takes like years to, like reach its maximum potential.
Do you find in your research that certain trees are um, better at absorbing? Really? Do you
Yeah,
have any? Yeah.
absolutely. So I worked on like different types of trees, and there's mangroves, and there's like a lot of carbon sequestration work going on in mangroves. So I come from a place called Jamshedpur in India, which is like 4 hours away from this mangrove forest. So I always heard of it. So basically you have these kind of like mangrove trees which grow in the slushy area of the forest. So it's like a lot of, it's kind of a wetland. It doesn't rain as much, but it's still like, it's in slush, basically like a lot of muck kind of area.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very strong trees. So the mangroves, they basically sequester maybe like 6-7 times more than I'm not really sure about the number right now,
Mm-hmm.
but they sequester a lot more than normal trees. And there's seagrass around the mangrove trees. So if the seagrass is healthy, then that mangrove almost sequesters 10 times more than it would otherwise.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's why there's a lot of work going on in mangroves. Like last year, I was doing an incubation program in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
and they mentioned that a lot of work has been going on in mangroves for the past 2-3 years. So yeah, and they also are like a habitat to some very indigenous, like for example, the Royal Bengal tiger from India. It's only found in that area in the world. So it has like very indigenous habitat in general, like animals and even people like who are very dependent on the biodiversity.
So there's much more balance going on than maybe we realized, or maybe we realized we weren't just paying attention.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's like World Mangrove Day on 26th July.
Mm-hmm.
So last year I went there to that area with one of my colleagues from Earth Bank, and we planted a lot of like maybe like 20,000 mangrove trees in that area. So, you know, like a lot of people were employed in that, and a lot of people were telling, and the trees are so strong. This other benefit is that there is this, it's across the coast of the Ganga River in India, Ganges. So the area which had the mangrove, if there are floods, the area which had it, the villages behind them were not destroyed because the trees protected them. As opposed to the places that did not have the trees, the houses and everything, they were destroyed on the coast in that area. So it's a lot more than just, you know, like sequestration or something, because it also eventually adds up in a passive way, right? You break something, it's other than money, you also invest in doing it again. That itself is a lot of carbon emission that's going on there.
Right.
So, like, as you said, like a bigger picture.
Yeah. I know that also one of the things that you're focused on is a director for AI for Diversity, which is a nonprofit global initiative that really focuses and educates really the diversity, having diverse backgrounds and providing diverse representation and participation in AI. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, because I know it's an international community, but sometimes, the folks listening may not have heard about it. So yeah, absolutely. Give us some background of what this organization does and what do you do to support it?
Absolutely. So I came across AI for Diversity about 10 months back, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this very amazing guy who knows a lot about artificial intelligence, Steve Nori, who I follow on LinkedIn. And he's the one who basically, like is the man behind AI for Diversity. So yeah, so I basically like came across the bias in general in artificial intelligence and hirings and opportunities and a lot of things, and it's a lot more than like we would like it to be in general. So I came across all of that, and then I was maybe like randomly browsing, I think someday, when I came across some very interesting posts from AI for Diversity. So that's when I decided to do a little bit of like research and deep dive into it and everything. So basically, AI for Diversity is, as you mentioned, it's a non-profit global initiative, and it's one of the fastest, like growing non-profit global initiatives right now. And it mostly works with, engaging and educating different diverse communities all across the world about artificial intelligence and how they can benefit from artificial intelligence, like as a more global community or global society. So I think one of the main beliefs or a strong motivation is that we believe that when it comes to technology, actually anything, but since we're focused on technology, let's talk about that. Like when it
Mhm.
comes to AI or technology, it helps if, like you have ideas and you have participation from different communities, different backgrounds, different thought processes. And it basically makes the work better, more like consistent, more sustainable, more widely used, and it also provides equal opportunities for everyone to like participate. Sometimes people have really amazing ideas, but they might be a little reluctant to
Mhm.
participate because no one else looks like them, or something like that. So basically, AI for Diversity is a community-driven initiative, and we work on, um, like creating opportunities for collaboration, or more of knowledge building activities through some research or some conference events or some blogging or just some articles that's published on the page. So I actually also wrote to Steve Nori on LinkedIn, and I was like, so we kind of knew each other because I used to comment a lot on his posts and stuff. And so I reached out to him and we had a meeting, and I was like, I am interested in this because, like this is something that I really believe in.
Mhm.
And sometimes people don't really take you as,
Serious.
seriously as you would want them to be, and that's something that I have sometimes faced as well. So I told him that I really believe in this, and he explained that some of the his vision sort of like with the AI for diversity, and I really liked it. So I joined as a director for Sweden and would like work more with Scandinavia.
Mhm.
So soon we will be working with like some sort of conferences and public events and hackathons. Like hackathons are a major part. Steve Nori also works with some other hackathon. Like he's also the founder-ish, co-founder of that as well. So some hackathons, different sort of like collaborations with academia or research institutes, so things like that. So it's going to be good.
Mhm.
Right now, all of us were a little busy on something else, but we'll work more towards this now soon.
As we wrap up, I do want to ask you, what your lessons learned are, but in listening to you, I think I've captured some of them. The one thing that I've noticed, the pattern is throughout your career to date, you've been an advocate in going out there and researching and finding something that really resonates with you and that you're passionate about, and you don't hold back. You reach out to the individual, the founder, you connect with them. I think that's really admirable. It goes back to what you said before. Not everybody maybe thinks that that's okay or that it's permitted, but I think what you've highlighted today, there's no reason not to. I mean, worst case scenario, you find that maybe it's not the right connection and you go and look for something else. But I would like to know from you, is there anything else, lessons learned, anything that you'd like to leave behind?
Absolutely. I think there are a couple. The first thing is that when you work in technology, it can be intimidating sometimes. It's
Hmm.
like you cannot know everything, and that's okay. But like there's always a way to learn it. If you want, it might take some time, but like if you want to, you can do it. So that's not a problem. So sometimes like actually often if I see someone interested in a job and there's like a listing and there's like 10 different things and they're like, oh, okay, so I just know two of them, and I can't really apply. So I don't think that should be a case because like a lot of times things are usually similar to each other, something you might know. So if you really like something, don't be intimidated by a
Hmm.
list of requirements. I mean, I think still the job I used to do at Earth Bank, if they decide to put an ad on out of 10, I would probably know like 5 things after working for a year and a half there. So yeah, so it's always like you learn most of it on the job. And you know yeah, so I think that's very important. And the other thing that I really like to explore different things,
Mhm.
like different fields of study. For example, like I am uh, interested in learning about the human mind, and interested in learning about the oceans, and interested in learning about pottery, I don't know, whatnot. But I realized that it's important to have a niche in general, like, like a width, because that kind of separates you from the other. Because right now, a lot of people are interested in technology and artificial intelligence. And if you have something that sets you apart, it kind of helps getting, like some doors open
Mhm.
a little quicker. That's something that I have experienced for the past some time. And yeah, and you said, if you want something to happen, it's better not to wait for anything. The worst case, you don't get it. It's okay. You learn something that will help you get it the next time. And I think that's extremely, important. Because, yeah, when I came to Sweden, I came for my bachelor thesis, and and then I did a research internship. And when I finished, I had a bachelor's degree. And it was in the middle of the pandemic. So the only option was to, like knock on different doors and see which door really opens.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I really believe that it's always a lesson despite the outcome. So I think that's important. I would love to learn from you, like, what do you think some of the very important like outcomes are that you have learned as well?
Oh, I think that's a whole nother interview. We should set that aside for a whole nother interview. Today is all about you. Thank you so much, Smriti. I think you articulated that perfectly, much better than I did. Um, really appreciate your time today. I know that this is you're in Sweden, I'm in the US, and I know the time zones are sometimes a little challenging to navigate. And I want to say thank you again for setting aside time today.
No, thank you so much. It's
Mhm.
actually the perfect time for you, but it must be super early for you. For me, but it must be super early for you. So thank you for,
Sure.
like making time. And yeah, it wasn't the most easy to do it. We had to reschedule it quite a bit, but thank you so
Yeah,
much.
sure. We'll talk again. I'd like to talk to you in a year from now and see what you're doing. Catch up.
Absolutely. I'm excited as well. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye.